Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with everyone. I'm Commissioner Rachel Oliver of the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. And I'm joined here by members of my team. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves now. And I'm going to turn this to Christina McLean to introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christina McLean. I'm a Deputy Commissioner at the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. And I'll turn it over to Lauren to introduce herself as well.
Hello, good morning. My name is Lauren Huberman. I'm the Director of the Career Center for MOPD.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That we also have a medical sign language interpretation provided by our staff interpreter, Jen McElroy. So you should be able to see her on the screen. We do have captions enabled through Zoom. Feel free to let us know if you need any other access. Access is so important to all of us here at MOPD. If me as a deaf person, I take that very seriously. I'm also so I'm profoundly deaf, and I'm talk like within accent, so we may take a couple of minutes to get used to how I talk, but feel free to ask questions. And thank you so much for joining us today. The point of why we are doing this webinar right now in July is because July is such an important month in the disability community. And July 26th, we honor the anniversary of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which gave landmark civil rights for people with disabilities in our nation. So every year we think about what that means if we commit this work to making the city of Chicago the most inclusive and accessible city in the nation. So thank you for joining us today. I'm going to start to I'm going to share. Hold up 1 second as we think about we got the screen up. So goods for today we to learn about the services and programs available at the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, and also to discuss inclusive hiring practices and strategies to attract diverse talent, including employees with disabilities. And employees with disabilities are untapped the talented labor force. If we want to encourage all of you to hire more people with disabilities, but also talk about the visible accommodations process and how to build a culture of accessibility within your business. And then finally, we'll talk about ways that we can collaborate together with our career center. So next slide, please. So the vision of the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities is to make Chicago the most accessible and inclusive city in the world. We're very proud of all of the work that we have done so far, and every day we approach new ways to continue to make our city accessible. And part of that is through working with you, our business community. The mission of our MOPD is that MOPD strives to ensure full participation and equal opportunities in all aspects of life for people with disabilities. We advocate for and directly support programs that improve quality of life and open pathways for innovation and partnership with the goal of inspiring positive change in Chicago. We work to ensure the rights of the disability community are equitably represented across city services, initiatives, and policies. And I want to take called out this mural. So this mural that you see the picture is at the side of one of our locations, the Central West Community Center, which is located at 2102 West Acton. This mural was created by Sam Kirk, and it shows people with disabilities in different workplaces the first image shows a teacher standing in front of a blackboard, writing out the words pride. And the teacher has a visible disability. Part of his arm is missing, and he's interacting with the student. And then in the center image, it is a woman with headphones. She may be somebody who has autism, and surrounding her is computer programming language. She's sitting at a computer, so you will be able to guess that she's a computer programmer hard at work. And finally, the third image is a doctor in a wheelchair, and he's wearing a white coat, and he's taking the heartbeat of a patient. These are all underrepresented fields where disabilities underrepresented, and we wanted to add to this visual representation in matter of what is possible. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, MOPD has 2 locations here. Both locations are very close to where you may go to get services for BACP. The first one is a City Hall. This will be at the first floor of City Hall. If you want to and I invite you to stop by if you have any questions, or if you want to learn more about our services in more depth. And then our other location is at the Southwest Community Center. And there's a picture here of the building, which is right across the street from the Jesse Brown VA. And you can see the building, and that there is another mall that honors disability pride and that proud disability identity. So that's where you can find us. And we're always happy to talk to you. Next slide, please. So here's an overview of MOPD's programs and services. First, we have an independent living program, which helps people with disabilities live independently in our communities, including providing personal assistance of up to 6 hours a week with household tasks. We have a MOPD Career Center, and Christina is here representing our Career Center today as well. And we'll be talking more about that. We also have a program that can help, a home modification program that will help to make your homes more accessible if you have a disability. For example, if you require a disability, if you're no longer able to use the stairs in your home, our home modification program will add a lift to, so that you can get in and out of your home. We can also make a bathrooms accessible, or the kitchen, depending on your access needs. We also have a accessibility compliance unit, which is led by an architect. In our architect works with a whole team to evaluate accessibility citywide and make sure that we meeting requirements around accessibility. And that team also provides technical assistance. We also provide disability awareness training. We work hard to provide disability access to city services. We have a public policy program and substance use prevention program. So that should a great snapshot of what we offer. Next slide, please. So we also launched a career center almost 1 year ago on July 26th. If that opening date was very intentional, we wanted to make sure that we honor the promise, the potential of the Americans with Disabilities Act through disability employment. That includes business owners with disabilities, businesses who are committed to hiring people with disabilities who are thinking about doing them. So our career center helps job seekers with disabilities in finding and retaining meaningful employment, internship, and volunteer opportunities. We work with job seekers with disabilities, but also with companies and employers to provide education and training and guidance around accessibility. when the Americans with Disabilities Act here to issue successful employment opportunities that meet the needs of the employer or the job seeker or the employee. Next slide, please. So here is there's a picture of the mural that he was in the picture of a building. This is a fantastic career center team. It truly takes a village. We are here to provide support, to work with you, and you can see staff, and everybody has a smile on their face. We love what we do. If we are so committed to working with other people, so we would love to work at those opportunities together. Next slide, please. So we also, I'm shifting gears a little bit, and I'm going to talk about what disability means and the very concept of disability justice. Disability justice centered intersectionality in the way the diverse system of oppression amplify viewers one another. Disability justice is a term that is very similar to disability rights, disability inclusion, but we adding the disability justice framework, which is that we center priorities and approaches of those most historically excluded groups, such as women, people of color, immigrants, and people who identify as LGBTQ+. Next slide, please. The very terminology that we use matters. I think that many of us use terminology that we hear people say, but we never stop to think or to check what terminology is appropriate. And as we all know, language evolves over time. For example, previously, people said the term handicap, special needs, differently able. Those are no longer appropriate for us to instead use the word disability or accessible. For example, accessible restrooms, accessible parking spots. For example, Robert saying this person is a person with a disability. I say I have a disability, or I'm a disabled person. Another term that's not appropriate to use anymore is the term mental retardation or mentally challenged. Instead, say intellectual, developmental, or cognitive disability. Another example that comes up with that is the term hearing impaired. People who are deaf and hard of hearing do not use that term because it implies that there is something wrong with you. Even also the term deaf mute, deaf and dumb is no longer used. That was a term used maybe 100 years ago. It is not appropriate. Instead, say the term deaf or hard of hearing. It was interesting about hearing impaired is that sometimes people who are blind or no vision may say I'm visually impaired. But you really want to defer to the person because some people who are blind or no vision may not even use the term visually impaired. So basically follow that person's preference. And sometimes we see someone with a dog, and we say, oh, that's a seagull dog. We don't use that term anymore. Instead, we use the term service animal or service dog. As always, a good rule is to follow what people are saying, what term they use themselves, or to ask. But these are just some quick tips to be. Now I'm going to turn it over to Christina.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right. The next couple slides here, I'm going to talk a little bit about disability and accessibility to give you a little bit more background on some of the work that we do here at the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. Next slide, please. Like the Commissioner mentioned, on July 26, 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law. On this slide, we have the definition of what a disability is according to the ADA. And that is a disability is a physical or mental impairment that significantly limits one or major life functions it's the history of that impairment or being perceived as having that impairment. So I could talk to you a little bit more about that and break that down a little bit. So major life function. Major life functions can be described as being able to see, hear, walk, talk. So one of, so if you have a physical or mental impairment that limits one of those life functions, you could be identified as someone with a disability. A history of an impairment is someone who, an example of that could be someone who has cancer but may be in remission. So you have a history of that diagnosis and a history of that impairment, which would mean that you'd be covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Being perceived as having an impairment. In preparation for this webinar, we talked yesterday about an individual who just had a facial deformity. And no other medical issues. So that individual, could be perceived as having a disability, although they may not have limits to any of their life functions, but they'd still be covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. We're going to go to the next slide here and talk about how prevalent disabilities are. Just to give you an idea of who your employees may be or who may be coming into your business. There are disabilities, there's 25.7% of individuals or adults in the United States, which is 61 million people, identify as having one or more disability. So that number is pretty high, it's 1 in 4. But it's also underreported. A lot of people may not identify as having a disability due to stigma or lack of just awareness that their condition might be covered as having a disability or be considered a disability. So, this number is pretty high to begin with 1 in 4. We always say that, it's very possible that someone, if you are not someone who has a disability, that you might know someone who has a disability. And then chances are pretty high of that with that 1 in 4 percentage. Individuals who are over the age of 65, 36% of individuals in that age group identify as having one or more disability. And again, that number could be very well, is very well underreported. I think a lot of individuals in this age group may just think that, they're just getting older and may not identify as having a disability. But if any of their conditions limit one of their major life functions, they would be covered under the ADA and be considered as an individual with a disability. Not all disabilities are visible. At least 20% of individuals identify with a disability that you cannot see. And a lot of these can be things such as mental health conditions, individuals who are neurodiverse or may have a learning disability. So it's really important that when you're interacting with people that you take that into consideration, that they may, you may not, interact with them at first and think that they have a disability. They may not be in a wheelchair. Not everyone with a disability is in a wheelchair or uses a white cane. So it's just good to have that awareness that someone you're interacting with may have a disability. So much of the work we do here at the Mayor's Office for People with Disability is ensuring that our city is as accessible as possible. And we strive, like the commissioner said, to be the most accessible and inclusive city in the world. I want to talk to you a little bit about accessibility and some ways that you can make the services accessible for your business, whether that be for your employees or for the residents or patrons that come into your facility. Accessibility refers to the design of a product, service, device, vehicle, or environment, and deals with how individuals how everyone is able to encounter that device or product. So accessibility refers to the ability or the right for someone to use, approach, enter, or exit, or communicate with. So all these things should be taken into consideration when products or services are being developed. It's very important that these be wrapped into the development processes of products and services, because there's just, it's easier at that point to build accessibility in versus recreate something to make sure it's accessible. So if you ever have any questions about any of the services that your business may provide and want guidance on how to make those more accessible, we'd love to reach out, love for you to reach out and talk to you a little bit more about that, because as an individual myself, I am low vision and legally blind. I know how important those adjustments are, or those accessibility features are in making me independent, making others more independent in the community as well. So why is accessibility important? I just talked about that a little bit, and we also referred to it earlier, but it's the law. So it's required by the Americans with Disabilities Act to make those services and products accessible. Accessibility helps everyone. In our next slide here, we're going to talk a little bit about different accessibility devices or ways to make things more accessible physically or for communication access. But you'll find that a lot of these things that we talk about are things that you use every day, or things that make your life easier, even for people without disabilities. And making a product accessible ensures that everyone is able to take advantage of that. Everyone's able to interact with it. So it just increases the product base or the service base that you are providing. So here are some examples of physical and communication access. A lot of these things like I said, you deal with on a daily basis. So for physical access, things like tactile pavement, we see that at the end of curb cuts. We see that at the before you get on the CTA to identify that there is the end of the platform there. That helps people who are blind or visually impaired using canes kind of identify that that's the end there. The tactile warnings give that warning. Curb cuts, we refer to a lot of accessibility as using the curb cut effect, because that curb cut that's designed for someone in a wheelchair to help them cross the street or identify where that street ends also helps a lot of other people as well, people without disabilities, people pulling luggage, people pushing strollers. So those accessibility devices or traits also really help everyone else. Also things like elevators, lifts, those are just some examples of ways that accessibility is incorporated into our everyday life. For communication access, things like large print, American Sign Language interpreters, they all help with communication access. Captioning, I know that that's something that everyone could benefit from. They could turn, you could turn that on in your TV at home. I know my parents do that when they're watching something with an accent. It's easier for them just to read the subtitles. So that is a device that I know that is more commonly used by people without disabilities as well. Text messaging is another accessibility trait or device that is used by, was designed for people with who are deaf and hard of hearing, but now all of us use on a daily basis. And I know that so many devices are so much technology that's built into our smartphones, such as Siri on an iPhone, benefits people who are blind or visually impaired, but is also something that a lot of people without disabilities use. So I think, I hope that, with this presentation, you're thinking about some of the things that you might not have thought about before. in regards to how accessibility impacts your life. Our next couple slides here, we're just going to talk about just some common tips to use when communicating or interacting with people with disabilities. Just some things to think about that can go a long way with making your workplace more accessible, making your business more accessible and inclusive. So first of all, don't have, like Commissioner said, with the person first language, it's important when you're using terminology that you identify the person first. So I am an individual with a disability. I am a person with a disability. And that just really calls out me as an individual before my disability. It's important not to assume that people with disabilities need help. Individuals with disabilities are the experts on their abilities and their capabilities. So, never just approach someone or someone in a wheelchair and start pushing it. It's always really great to ask someone if they need help and then how they need help. Individuals who are blind or visually impaired might really benefit from you giving them some wayfinding assistance. And that could be different for every person. So asking, would you like my elbow and I can guide you? Or maybe just some verbal instructions would help that person. So individuals with disabilities really know how they would like to be assisted or what would help them the most. Commit to being understood and understanding the person you're communicating with is really important. So that might mean communicating with people in a variety of different ways. You might need to give people some extra time to communicate. You might have to ask more direct questions or yes or no questions, or even ask people to repeat themselves. But it goes, it's really important that people with disabilities have the opportunity to explain themselves and to be communicated with. So it could be as simple as maybe pulling out a piece of paper or the notes app on your phone to maybe talk with someone in a written format, or just being more direct in how you're speaking with them or asking, like I said, those yes or no questions. So it's important to use plain language as well, which could be really just breaking down communication in its simplest form. More tips, identifying yourself. For example, if I was in an event or a space where I was going up to someone who I thought had a disability, I could say something as simple as, "Hi, my name is Christina. I'm a deputy commissioner at the mayor's office for people with disabilities. I'm here. Is there anything that you would like help with or more information about?" So that allows people to identify who you are, your voice, and your why you're at that event or why you're there. It's really important that you speak directly to the person with a disability if they're the ones who's having that conversation with you. For example, if I was speaking to an individual who is deaf, I would speak directly to that person. And if there was an American Sign Language interpreter there, they would be interpreting what I would be saying. And they're, expecting me to not be looking at the interpreter, but directing my focus and my communication to the individual who is deaf. And lastly, I can talk a little bit about service animals. We get a lot of questions about service animals, but a service animal is defined by the Department of Justice as an animal that is trained to perform a specific task for a person with a disability. If you're ever interacting with someone with a service animal that you're not sure if it's a service animal, the Department of Justice allows you to ask 2 questions to that individual. And that's, is that dog a service animal trained because of a disability? And what task is that dog trained to perform? Service animals are allowed in all public places. There are differences between service animals and emotional support animals, and emotional support animals are not covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Basically, if you are interacting with someone who has a service animal and that service animal is not under control, it's not behaving, you are allowed to ask that individual to leave with the service animal and then come back to receive that service without that dog. So, it's important that you're not denying any kind of service to the individual. But service animals have a lot of training, and they should be under control of their handlers at all times. So those are just some basic tips when interacting with people with disabilities. We do have a more comprehensive disability awareness and etiquette training where we go through different disability types and talk about the best ways or best practices in effective communication. But we just wanted to give you a high level overview of some best practices that, work with all different disability types. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, who is going to discuss disability employment. This is something we work every day on at our MOPD Career Center. And she'll give you some background on ways you can work with us and ways to make your business more inclusive.
Great. Thank you, Christina. So good morning again. My name is Lauren. So we are going to talk a little bit about rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act, highlighting both the rights of the job seekers as well as the employers. So the rights of the job seekers, we'll start there. Job seekers are not required to disclose their disability during the hiring process. Employers cannot ask about disability status. Employers cannot ask an applicant to have a medical evaluation until after a conditional job offer. And employers cannot reject a candidate because of their disability if they can still perform the job duties. So that's a lot right there, but those are some of the common things that we talk about with our job seekers at our career center. Disability disclosure is very individual. And so I think it's hard just to give, blanket guidelines to job seekers, but it is different. Like Christina said, if somebody has a physical disability and it's apparent and they go into an interview. And so, that is obviously one way of disclosing the disability, and the employer may know that, versus an invisible disability where disclosure might be more complicated. There might be more fear and stigma around that. And we'll get into that a little bit more as well. Employers are not allowed to ask about somebody's disability status, like it says. And an employer cannot reject a candidate because of their disability if they can still perform the job duties. And we'll get into that a little bit more as well. So under the rights of employers, employers can ask if a candidate is able to perform the duties of the job with or without accommodations. Employers are entitled to hire the best applicant from the pool of qualified candidates. So I think sometimes it's helpful to have a concrete example. So this one is a person with cerebral palsy is qualified for a position. However, the employer hires a person without a disability who has the same educational background, but also 3 years experience. The employer is free to hire the candidate with more experience. So just calling out that obviously employers have that right, they have the decision. At our career center, we do partner with employers, but never is it an expectation that an employer is obligated to hire our candidates. We want to put the best candidates forward that we have that we think are a strong fit, but ultimately it is up to the employer to determine who is the strongest fit for that opportunity. So reasonable accommodations is another thing. We work with both job seekers to help them navigate that process of requesting reasonable accommodations, and we work with employers as well, sometimes to help identify reasonable accommodations. I think something that's really important here is that most accommodations are less than $500. So I think there's a perception that these accommodations can be very expensive, but in a lot of cases, they're very simple and easy to implement. So reasonable accommodations are modifications and adjustments made by an employer for an employee. They allow a qualified person with a disability to perform essential job functions and enjoy equal opportunities. And again, just making this real and concrete. Technology is something that we have at our career center. So we have 3 computers with assistive technology, and we have job seekers who may need to use that technology using screen readers like JAWS, so that they're able to access information just as anybody else would. Equipment, we gave an example of a standing desk. You can have a desk also that can move to different lengths, different heights, etc. So just making things accessible, it can be very simple. Interpreters and readers, so an ASL interpreter for deaf employees or a reader for visually impaired employees. Additional breaks or schedule changes, increased breaks as needed, flexibility in work hours. Maybe the individual needs a little more time to process. Maybe they need to take medication at a certain time during the day. I think these are things that are pretty reasonable, and a lot of us want that kind of flexibility at our workplaces. Job restructuring, so removing non-essential tasks. And I think the key here is non-essential, because of course, if there are essential job functions that somebody needs to be able to perform, you're not going to be able to remove that. But here's an example. A firefighter became blind in one eye. He could do his entire job, except he could not drive the fire truck. Driving the truck was not a specialized task, and his job description noted it was something he may need to do, not must need to do, and therefore the employer could remove this task. So again, we'll work with employers to talk about whether or not all of certain job functions are essential. And sometimes they are, and obviously that's okay. But just that's another accommodation. Creating an inclusive culture, like Christina said, with some of these accessibility features that we encounter in our daily lives, creating an inclusive culture really benefits everybody. And there's a lot of data and information about this. So having an inclusive culture, makes everybody feel more comfortable. It makes the workplace more accepting. People feel like they can be themselves. But here we have ensure that job applicants, candidates, and employees with disabilities have access to the same tools, workplace benefits, and opportunities for development and advancement as non-disabled employees. So again, ensuring that individuals have I think the same opportunities, and that's really important in the workplace. And again, when we think about making this concrete, here are some ideas and some ways that you can make your business more inclusive. So establish a disability-focused employee resource group. And it can be individuals with disabilities, and it can also be individuals who do not have disabilities, but who feel that this is important and that they want to be part of this group. Encourage self-identification. That's something that, at the city, like there's a ERG for city employees, which is really neat. And again, it's in the spirit of encouraging self-identification, connecting with employees across the city and in different departments. I think it really creates a culture of inclusivity. Again, use closed captioning for every presentation and meeting, and ensure all training platforms are digitally accessible. So, I think this is something that we're all pretty used to using, Zoom, using Teams, using these different technologies, but really being vigilant to make sure that accessibility needs are met. Flexible workplace policies for all employees, again, that really benefits everybody. And I think we can all agree that folks want to work somewhere that's more flexible. Accessible office spaces as well as social activities. So you don't want to plan an event after work that's not going to be accessible for people to get to. Just one example. Emergency preparedness plans address the needs of employees with disabilities. Mentorship programs. We have an MOPD Career Center mentorship program, and that's a really nice way, again, to connect people, our job seekers with disabilities, to mentors who may or may not have disabilities. And what we found from doing that mentorship program most recently is that mentees and mentors both benefited and learned a lot from one another. Ensure promotion opportunities for people with disabilities. And the last one is training for all employees around disability inclusion. And this is something that employers are often eager to have us do, which is really neat. So we do a lot of training around disability awareness and etiquette with employers at lots of levels, at the leadership level, folks working directly with employees, working in customer service, et cetera. And then finally, ways that we can collaborate. We are happy to provide guidance on how to implement and strengthen inclusive hiring practices for people with disabilities, retention and technical assistance for employers, practices on how to support people with disabilities, and then any additional related training. We are happy to do that. And we do work with employers quite a bit. We encourage people to ask questions. We're very open. So we're happy to provide any type of guidance or support that we can. Outreach and networking opportunities. So we have career fairs. We're actually hosting one on Tuesday for probably about 25 employers who have registered so far, and we'll have job seekers with disabilities who were excited to really make those connections with employers in person at our Central West Community Center. We'll have other networking events. We attend a lot of different kinds of community events. We work with lots of community-based organizations, city departments. We have professional development workshops. And again, like I said, mentorship opportunities. And if that is something that you're interested in, we will be restarting our mentorship program this fall. And so we can provide more information if that's something that you're interested in. And then here is our contact information. Please feel free to reach out to any of us. We're happy to talk to you and answer questions, or like Commissioner Arfa said, if you want to come by our City Hall office or our Central West Community Center, we are more than happy to have you. And then here is just more specifics, our contact info, our Twitter handle or feed, I forget what it's called. And then if you want to subscribe to get our newsletter and get information about MOPD and what we're doing, and then our Facebook page as well. Geraldine, you're muted. Okay. I can't hear you.
Now?
Yes.
Thank you for all of our presentations. If anyone has a question, if they could please put it in the chat. I'll give everyone a few minutes. We're getting some great comments. Just looking at if there's any questions. Such great information, guys. Maybe the We'll give everyone another minute. And again, this webinar will be posted at youtube.com/Chicago BACP. And that information was also put in the chat. Well, it does not look like there has been any questions. So I'd like to thank all the presenters. Thank you very much for such great information. I'd like to thank all our attendees and wishing everyone a safe and happy weekend. Have a good one, everyone.
You too, thanks.